on the NewsChannel 5 network. This is Sportsline.
Hey there, Sportsline on your television. Steve Laban here with you. Glad you are here with us on this Monday night on NewsChannel 5. Plus, lots to talk to tonight about the Predators. The season is over. They lost in Game 7 last Thursday night against the Winnipeg Jets by a score of 5-1 at home. It was clearly a closer game than that. A couple late goals for the Jets put it away. But the season ends in round 2, less than halfway to the ultimate goal. That is a real frustration after the best season in franchise history. You rack up 117 points on 53 wins. You win your first ever Central Division title. You win the President's Trophy. And now you're done in round 2. So certainly some frustrations for the Preds, but yet not all lost in what was a terrific season. I would love to hear from you tonight, though. How do you view this Preds season now? It's over. After all of the superlatives we just talked about, there will be no Stanley Cup once again here in Nashville. They only got about halfway to where they were a year ago when they surprisingly got all the way to the Stanley Cup final. But the year as a whole, like I said, you're hanging 2 banners as President's Trophy winner and as the Central Division champion. Not to mention the most wins ever. Pekka Rinne is going to win the Vezina Trophy. PK Subban very well may win the Norris Trophy this year. So both individually and collectively as a group, there was a lot accomplished this season, but in the playoffs, which is how you remembered, maybe some frustrations about where that goes. 737-7767, the number tonight. How do you feel about the way this season went for the Nashville Predators? And what do you take away from that series against the Jets and how it played out over the course of 7 games? We'll hear from David Poile and Peter Laviolette coming up throughout the course of the show tonight. They were pretty blunt about the fact that it's a real disappointment to not get to where they ultimately wanted to, and that will gnaw at you for a long, long time. But they also felt like they were really close in that series, and they were. If you look back at the course of the series, think about it. In Game 1, they outshot the Jets by, what, 30? It was 48-19, I think, in that game. Yet they lose. In Game 3, they're in Winnipeg, and they're up 3-0 after 1 period. And the wheels fall off in the second period. Jets score 4. They ultimately win that game. And you lose. Game 5, you're back at home. Series is even. Chance to take control. And you lose. You go win on the road in Game 6, forcing a Game 7, giving yourself a chance to close things out at home in Game 7. Everybody was confident that they were going to be able to do it, and they didn't. It was a lack of guys being able to step up at the key time. It was a lack of an ability to make the key play during this run or get the key save during this run, and ultimately it ends. And there's some real frustration there because there were opportunities. The Jets are a really good team. In my opinion, they're the favorites to win the Stanley Cup of all the teams that are left. They were the second best team during the regular season. They've looked phenomenal during the playoffs. And I think they match up well against anybody that they would face. So I think the Jets will ultimately win the Stanley Cup. But I think if the Preds had gotten past the Jets, I would have picked them to ultimately win the Stanley Cup. That's how good those two teams were and how good the series was back and forth, frankly. But from a Predators perspective, there were opportunities, man. If you win Game 1 or you win Game 3 on the road, this series looks totally different at that point. And they just missed that opportunity. They just missed those chances early on in the series. And against a really good team, you can't leave games out there in a playoff series. And the Preds arguably left 2, in which they had good performances but let something slip through their fingers. And you can't do that. And in a 7-game series, it'll come back to bite you, and it certainly did, because the Jets were just flat out better in Game 7. And that is something that this team will have to reconcile with themselves over the course of the next year, that they fought so hard for home ice advantage, yet in the biggest game of the season, it meant nothing for them because of the way they played and how they allowed the Jets to come in and dictate play in their barn in a Game 7. So missed chances, inconsistency. What else did you think about that series and the takeaways that you grabbed from it? And what does this mean for the Predators moving forward? Doesn't sound like they're planning on making a whole lot of changes. Today, we basically learned that the roster we should expect to return intact next year. Mike Fisher, we know, is going to retire for good this time. He says there's no chance you're going to convince him to come out of retirement at this point for a second time. And we learned today from General Manager David Poile that both veteran forward Scott Hartnell and defenseman Alexei Emelin will not be back next year. Both guys came in on one-year contracts as veterans. They both served a purpose this year. Hartnell brought some physicality, a little bit of scoring punch, but he was a scratch more times than not during the postseason, though he did provide a big lift during the second-round series against the Jets. And then there's Emelin, who came in and certainly provided them some depth and help on the blue line. He was a top 4 guy in the first half of the season when Ryan Ellis was out. But in the playoffs, after Yannick Weber came back from injury, he was a scratch. It was Weber and Emelin on the third line in the third pairing for the Predators during the playoffs. So no Emelin. Irwin was in along with Weber, and that, I think, tells you all you need to know about what happened there. As it ran its course with Alexei Emelin, he will be gone. But the core of this team will be back next year, and they will be looking for big things, believing that the window is very much open for a chance to win this Stanley Cup ultimately here in Nashville. How they approach the season will be interesting, because this season they won at home ice advantage badly. I think they did want to go after the President Trophy. They wanted that first division title. All those things were important for this team this year, and they got them. But the thing they want the most is to hoist that Stanley Cup in the mid-June. And they weren't at their best in these playoffs. So how they approach next season to make sure they're at their best and they're peaking at the best time of the year will be interesting to watch. See how it plays out. Again, we want to hear from you tonight. 737-7767 is the number. The Stanley Cup playoffs continue. Winnipeg with a win at home. Very impressive, by the way, how you can go from a Game 7 in Nashville on Thursday night to less than 48 hours later dropping the puck at home in Winnipeg against a totally different opponent in Vegas, who's rested and ready to go, and just come out and dominate the way they did. That was a very, very impressive performance by the Jets to go up 1-0 in that series, though it is not necessarily carrying over tonight in Game 2. The Golden Knights with 2 goals in the first period and lead 2-0 after 1 at Bell MTS Place. All of a sudden, road teams are going in and finding some success up there in the Winnipeg whiteout. And we'll see if Vegas can really make things interesting in this series with a win tonight in Game 2 to even things up. Meanwhile, talk about interesting. What in the world is going on in the Eastern Conference Final, where Tampa Bay looked to be everybody's pick? They had the best record in the Eastern Conference during the regular season. They beat the team with the second best record in Boston handily in round 2, winning in 5 games and 4 in a row after dropping Game 1. Well, now they've dropped the first 2 games of the conference final against Washington. The Capitals have looked absolutely outstanding. They put up 10 goals on Andrei Vasilevsky, and the defense of the Caps. You hear about the offense. You love Alexander Ovechkin and some of the guys, Evgeny Kuznetsov, guys who can really light up the lamp. But Barry Trotz, the former Predators coach, has gone out there and turned them into a defensive team. They lead the league in blocked shots during the playoffs. Braden Holtby, after being platoon late in the season and starting the playoffs on the bench, has come back and looked like a guy who once won the Vezina Trophy. He's been absolutely outstanding. And right now, Washington leads that series 2-0, heading back home to D.C. tomorrow night with a chance to really take a stranglehold on the Eastern Conference Finals. So lots of hockey still to watch here, even though the Predators are not in it anymore. But we will continue to discuss the Predators tonight and what happened to them in that Western Conference second-round series against the Jets. Neither team won back-to-back games at any point And unfortunately for the Predators, that meant the Jets won in Game 7 here in Nashville. It was the first ever Game 7 played at Bridgestone Arena. It was set to be a spectacular evening and a celebratory night. The atmosphere was set. It was revved up and ready to go, but the Jets quieted it very quickly with 2 goals against Pecorine in the first 10 minutes and 47 seconds. He was then pulled for UC Soros, which certainly is a talking point now in the offseason. That was the shortest start by a goaltender in a Game 7 in the history of the NHL. And it changed the momentum of that series completely, obviously, or that game in particular. It quieted Bridgestone Arena. It gave the Jets all of the momentum in the world. And credit to them, because the Predators fought back late in that period. They got a power play goal from PK Subban and made it 2-1 with 40 minutes left, and you felt like they could come. And you felt like the crowd might will them over the top, but the Jets, give them the credit because they dominated the puck, they controlled possession, and then they pounced when given the opportunities. Blake Wheeler to Mark Scheifele off of a turnover made it 3-1 after 2. That came right on the heels of the Preds pressing and looking like they might be able to get the tying goal. And then in the third period, again, puck possession, milk away the clock at a couple of opportunities, one on the power play and one an empty netter late that made it 5-1. But the Jets just controlled that game, and much like the Preds did with a lead in Game 6 in Winnipeg, in Game 7, Winnipeg locked things down with a lead on the road here in Nashville. So the Jets were the better team in that series, at least. And a great, great season for the Predators comes to an end sooner than you would have expected. We'll get to much more on this, and again, we welcome your phone calls tonight. 737-7767 is the number. Call us up. Tell us what you thought about that series, what you make of what happened, and what you make of it going forward for the Nashville Predators. We want to hear from you tonight on the program, and when we come back, we will hear from the general manager and the head coach, David Poile and Peter Laviolette, as we continue on here on Sportsline on News Channel 5+.